No.
I knew you were going to edit that
out. God damn it. Hey, I am GoodGameKitty, also known as Stacy by people who know me in real life. I am one of the owners of Velvet Fang and the creator of the Dungeons and Destiny project. And this...
I'm Erin. I work as a pharmacy technician. I have played D&D as a player. I have DM'd once, and it was hard. That's basically all I know about DMing.
Yeah, so the whole point of this podcast that we're going to try out, we're going to see how it goes, is basically like game design in general is my life. It's literally my full-time job. As she said, her full-time job's working with pills.
And I have a degree as a video editor, so most of this game design stuff is outside of my wheelhouse, regardless of if it's degree-related or current job-related.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to teach her some of that stuff. And we're gonna see how it goes, and hopefully maybe you'll learn something too. To start things off, I thought we would talk about a relatively simple concept. For this one, we're gonna be talking about loot, specifically the concept of a loot curve. And everything we're gonna go over here, like I'm gonna be using D&D terms because that's what she's familiar with, D&D stuff, but all of these things you can take to any campaign, any game even that you're planning, whether or not it's a TTRPG or even video games. So, loot curves.
I know what curves are in editing software.
But you remember graphs, right?
Graphs was the stuff I struggled with a little bit, to be honest. But I'm good. I was good in math class, though, so I'm sure I'll be fine enough. Are we using sines and cosines?
No. Nothing that complicated.
Okay.
Not even close.
I think I'll be fine, then. Sweet.
All right, so anyways, we're going to go to the very beginning, though, before we talk about this. Before we talk about loot curves, we're going to go right back to the very beginning, which is we're going to define loot. And for our purpose, loot is material goods found by or awarded to the player characters for their actions.
I like that. I want stuff.
You want stuff, and that stuff could be like in-game currency, it could be valuables like gemstones, it could be magic items, and these don't have to be the only rewards you give to your player characters in a campaign, but for what I'm going to be teaching about today, that's all we're going to focus on, is that kind of rewards. To sort of set the basis for how to understand loot curves and why you might use them in your campaigns. It's like, I want you to imagine you're a GM, right? Just look at me. You're a GM.
I'm a GM?
Yes, you're a GM.
I'm a GM.
You're a GM. And you've decided you want to do that cool game design trick where you'll have a shopkeeper that's selling that really super awesome item that's like really super expensive because you're only supposed to get it to high levels. Mm-hmm. You've played, I'm assuming you've played a JRPG before that's done that.
I do like JRPGs.
And you've decided that like this item is going to be built for 12th level. And you build the shop, and you slap the price on the item, and you think it's a high enough number that there's no way they're going to be able to afford that item before time,
It's
right?
the really expensive maid outfit.
Right? It's super freaking expensive.
It's the golden maid outfit that doesn't make any sense in the setting. There are no maids in this setting of the JRPG.
But it's a golden maid outfit.
Mm-hmm. So it's pretty, and it's gold, and it's like $1 billion.
Right.
Or whatever.
And you build your campaign, you assume they won't get it until they get that $1 billion, and you're guessing, it's not going to happen until at least 12th level. So you make that item for 12th level, right? And then the party reaches 5th level, and you realize you've accidentally been a little too loot happy, and suddenly they can afford that item right now.
They aren't supposed to be golden maids yet. They are only allowed to be golden maids at level 12.
Right, but... You know, I can imagine that you've played in a campaign like that, even. I think I've accidentally done that for one of the games I ran for you.
I'm sure we've all.
Where, you know, you weren't supposed to get something until a higher level, but wasn't quite paying attention, and now you've got it way sooner than what was planned on happening.
Oops.
And that's not something that's, like, unique to loot, right? Like, that happens with stories, even.
So now, one player is getting to wear this really fancy golden maid outfit, and their, like, AC is stupid high, and now every battle's too easy.
And now you have a choice to make where it's like, all right, are we going to retcon it? Are we going to try to steal it? Are we going to try to break it?
Are we going to nerf the item?
Are we going to nerf the item, or are we going to go through all the work to buff the rest of the campaign? And, like, these are all perfectly viable options, and I'm guessing you, the royal you, if you're a GM who's ever been in this situation, you've done one of those things before, right? You've figured it out.
But you were wrong?
No! And it's exclusively what I don't want to say! You're not a bad GM if you end up in this kind of situation and you do whatever you feel like you have to do to adapt to it. That's not a bad thing.
It's bad in the way that, like, they said it in the 90s where bad meant good.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
So bad?
Okay, fine.
You're so bad?
Oh my god. But okay, so you're not a bad GM if you walk into this situation on accident and you just do what you gotta do to adapt to it. We've all been there. We will be there again. It's really not that big of a deal because at the end of the day, it's a game. This is just a normal mishap with planning your campaign. But let's say you really don't want that to happen again, right? One thing that you can do is build what's called a loot curve for your campaign. And a loot curve is a table or graph showing the expected amount of loot your PCs will have at any given time. And if you're going to build a loot curve, most likely you're going to be playing a type of TTRPG that has levels to it. You're going to be playing like Starfinder, Pathfinder, D&D, anything like that, right? So I'm just going to use levels as the universal common denominator, but use whatever section method you want.
The section could be, if you're very focused on, say, if it's all about traversing a location, it could be based on when they get to a new location.
Yeah.
So it could be based on that. Or like milestones of like a character's development. Or if it's a very politically focused thing, you're like, all right, well, this next political machination has developed, thus changing the landscape. Level is right now in this going to be using numbers, but level can be the level of anything. Yeah. Really.
Yeah. That's exactly it. So we're just going to imagine it's levels 1 through 10, which I'm just going to grab this and fill in. So then for your loot curve, it's as simple as picking out how much loot right now, before you start running the campaign, you're going to pick it out, how much loot you want to give them per level. And let's say in our example, we're going to go with 100 gold. So we would do loot, gold, and we'll do 100 per level.
Because like the first column, right? The first column is A. And that is our levels. Okay. And that is, so the A column, which is the levels, so that's our interval markers.
Yeah, those are your
sections. Of when
sections.
Things increase. Mm-hmm. Because I was going to say for loot, 100 what? So it could be gold. What if it's including items? Does that mean
we'll talk about that in a little bit.
We're going
to cover the very basics. We're going to pretend it's one single loot thing right now.
All right, and it's just 100 gold, really easy math.
Yeah, really easy math. You say you're going to do 100 gold per level. And then technically, that's it. That's your loot curve. It's a straight line. We could do some things to make it an actual curve, but again, more complicated. We'll talk about it later.
We're doing basic, but
very basic concept right now.
So does that mean every time my level 1 group of 4 D&D players or whatever wins their battle, they beat all the bandits, or they win against the mini boss or whatever, they get 100 gold?
No.
Or does that mean by the time they all get to level 2, they will have made 100 gold?
Yes. It is for that section of a campaign, while they're level 1, the entire time, they will accumulate 100 gold by the time they turn level 2. They might get 50 gold for turning in a bounty. They might find 20 gold on the side of the road. They might get 10 gold for retrieving a lost cat stuck up a tree or something like that, right?
Okay.
It's throughout that section of your campaign, they will total up to 100 gold. And you decide how you want to spread that out.
So you're taking 100 gold for when they're all still level 1, or in the first room of the castle, or the first stage of the political map, whatever. Yeah. And it's 100 gold divvied up amongst that section.
Yes.
Or 1,000 gold, or 50 rubies, or whatever your thing is.
Because the other thing you can do is, like I said before, this is a straight line, but you could change it up and say, like, all right, starting at level 4, instead of getting 100 gold, they're going to get 200 gold, right? And then you just update your graph, and now you have something approaching closer to a curve. Maybe we go 300 here. You could do exponential if you really wanted a curvy curve kind of situation.
Where, like, as they're gaining levels, they're, like, really gaining money.
D&D even does this at Basic and in another podcast episode, because it's going to take a lot more to go over that one. We can talk about how D&D's loot curve is actually designed. But you start out in the lower levels, you only get 100 per level, then you start getting 200 per level, then you start getting 300 per level. And you're just picking out right now, before you start the campaign, how much they're going to get at whatever intervals you have chosen. And that is the basics of building a loot curve. Now, when you're thinking to yourself, okay, I want this item to only be available at 8th level. So we price it at 1,500 gold, because it's right there in our graph. So as long as we follow our own loot curve, we will ensure it is impossible for them to buy that item ahead of time.
Oh, wait, real quick. So, level 1... by the time they level up, they'll have accumulated 100 gold. Mm-hmm. Do they accumulate 200 more gold? Or is it 100 plus 100 to get 200? Because, like, they already have 100 gold,
It would only
right?
get 100 more. So this is assuming they don't spend that money on anything. They don't have any daily expenses or anything like that. You can account for those in your campaign, though. I'm going to tell you the formula for it, and then you're probably going to go, Stacy, that's fucking bonkers. Do you really think anyone is going to be capable of following that formula kind of way? Let me tell you what it is.
All right.
So all you have to do is figure out the average amount of time that they're going to be spending at every level, and then the daily expenses times the number of days they spend at that level is whatever the expenses are going to be for that level, and you just subtract it from whatever they earned for that level. Now the bonkers part is...
It's like a net profit and a gross profit.
Basically, the bonkers part is, how the fuck does anyone sit here and go, oh, I can totally say with confidence that you're going to spend an average of 3 in-game days at level 1. Because how many times have you been in that quest where the GM's like, oh, real easy, in and out, this isn't going to take long. And 3 sessions later, you're still on that fucking quest, right?
It has turned into its own saga.
Yeah, right? How many, or even the reverse, right? Where the GM's planned out this whole thing, but they completely forgot that someone had that one item that negates 90% of it.
The I have the coin if I skip the battle.
Yeah. I have the coin if I skip the battle, and now your 3-day quest just became a 1-day quest. Either of those situations. Ideally, that's what you do, though, right? You figure out how many in-game days, or whatever... like if you have daily expenses, you would do in-game days. If you want to do things like your campaign features a lot of traveling, so they have to budget for fuel, then it's like how the average fuel expense per whatever level is, whatever expenses per level you have to calculate. But trying to calculate that is going to be ultimately a fool's errand, but it's still kind of important to do. Because even if you can't get 100%, even a 60% accurate one, you can work with that. That's still going to give you good numbers.
You get an idea, at least. A guess.
And so we would just type it in as, let's say their expenses are going to end up being 10 gold for that level. So 100 minus 10 means they actually get 90 gold per level. And then...
So, because all of this is as their... Was that the wrong line?
Nope, I just had to do that.
Got it. So all of this is as they're going through it. So, like, because level 2, it's not they made 100 gold and then they get 200 more gold. It's they will have accumulated by the end of level 2, 200 total gold.
Yeah.
However, if they have spent none of it.
If they have spent none of it. And then if they have spent some of it, if they've spent 10 gold per level, they now have 180. Because it would be 10 at level 1 and 10 at level 2. And you would technically have to drag that formula down the whole graph here. Let me do that real fast.
Okay.
So... I'm just going to do this first. Boop. Did I do it right? Pretty sure I did it right. And then what did I say? This was going to be 200 at 4. And then, I don't know, I'm making it 8 now, where it goes up to 300. The numbers are relatively arbitrary.
Right now. So, and say you wanted to, it's a different number now. 1320 was what the golden maid outfit's going to cost. Which means to even earn it by level 8, they would have had to have spent none of their money.
And that means, well, no, this is them assuming they have spent money. It would be 1320.
Oh, just for their expenses, though.
Because if it's 10, we can add this up in another table here. So what these columns are saying here now, so if we're assuming they're spending 10 gold per level, right? Mm-hmm. This is what they have. This is what they have accumulated. Mm-hmm. But they've spent this amount, so they only have this.
Right.
So... we're looking at this table. We are assuming they will have spent 80 gold by now, so they will only have 1320 gold left. So if we wanted to make this...
If they didn't, like, decide to gamble their money or something and blow it all on...
We'll talk about that. Put a pin in it. We'll talk about that. So, let's say they only do their daily living expenses, and they spend their gold on nothing else. Mm-hmm. That means if you want this item available at 8th level, it's 1320 instead of 1400 for your total on that one.
Right.
Because you're accounting for their expenses.
Right.
But, now this is where things get a little tricky, because, it gets tricky, but also this is where kind of like the beauty of tabletop role-playing games comes in, mm-hmm. which is, you are assuming that they are going to spend this money, they're going to be accumulating a certain amount, because you're the GM, right? And you have planned for this, and you are going to stick to your loot curve.
You have planned for them to be making this much by the end of each level.
You've planned for this, but let's say you're doing a story or whatever, and one of the things that ends up happening is that they get their expenses reimbursed for that day. Well, now they're going to have their money a little bit earlier. Maybe that happens a couple times. Maybe something happens where one of them gambles a whole bunch of money and wins. There's still opportunity for them to obtain the item ahead of what you have designed. And this is where I see, like, the beauty in these numbers and why I freaking love doing this kind of things. Because I love it when that happens and I can point to the players and say, here's literally where the numbers have designed, but you assholes
somehow
you assholes did this instead. So even though you have this plan, at the end of the day, if you 100% want to guarantee that there is not a snowball's chance in hell of this item falling into their hands before their given level, you cannot present the item to them at all, right?
Because otherwise they're going to want to get it.
Because here's the thing. Let's say, you built it for 8th level, right? The item, it's meant to be at 8th level, and you priced it for 8th level and all that stuff. But the party, they're at 2nd level, and like let's say they have a rival, and the rival is beating them all the time, because this is the whole story you want to do of the rival that they're constantly trying to level up and get more powerful than.
Gary Oak.
It's Gary Oak, right?
Smell you later.
It's your rival that's constantly beating you. And the players, they see this item in the shop, and they're like, oh my god, if we had that item, we could beat our rival, but we can't afford it, and we're not getting gold that much because, you as a GM, you're sticking to your loot curve. Now the party might start thinking about other ways to get the item. They don't have to just buy it, right? They could convince the shopkeeper that, we'll watch the shop for the weekend, and then they can go quick use it to win the tournament against Gary Oak. Or they'll steal it.
Just straight up steal it.
Burn the shop down and run off with the item or something.
We're not sure how scrupulous this team is.
We're not sure how scrupulous they are. And depending on the severity of the rival, because like a situation like Gary Oak, you might not be able to press a paladin into stealing just for Gary Oak. But if we're dealing with the big bad evil guy
maybe it's Giovanni.
Well, even worse than that. We're dealing with like a big bad evil guy that wants to like take over the world because of mind control spores or something they're releasing into the atmosphere. And the shopkeeper doesn't believe this is happening at all, because why would they? Or for whatever reason, maybe they're actually...
Kids these days.
Or maybe they're just actually a demon and they don't care. For any reason, the shopkeeper refuses to budge and refuses to help. You could push a lawful good party into committing a crime for the greater good. And that is storytelling, right? Mm-hmm. And you as the GM, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to tell this to the players. All you have to do is set up the numbers to encourage it. And that's what I really like about game design, and that's what I really like about doing this kind of thing and figuring this kind of stuff out.
So basically, like, if you just didn't want them to be able to have it, period, just don't show it to them.
Just don't give it to them, or you can put it in the shop, but then say to the players out of character, I'm putting it here so that you know what's going to happen, but literally you cannot get it. Just have that conversation with them. It's fine. You can just talk to your players.
Sometimes you can just tell them.
Sometimes you can just tell them. You're people. You can just talk. It's fine.
But if you're fine with the idea of, ideally, they can only get the Golden Maid outfit at 8th level. But I'll let them know it exists in case they want to get really, really spicy with it. In case they want to get creative with it. If you're fine with that, then, like, having it set up this way will make them, if they're, like, level 2 or 3 and still want that level 8 Golden Maid outfit, they're gonna have to get creative about it.
Right? And,
Maybe they start selling newspapers.
And this works if you stick to your loot curve. If you start getting a little bit loot happy and stuff like that, then they may not feel pressured to explore these other avenues because they think the money's rolling in and they'll get it eventually and all they gotta do is a few more quests and they'll get it, right? Mm-hmm. Now, sticking to your loot curve, obviously, as we sort of touched on earlier, is a little bit easier said than done because this does assume certain things about your campaign. It assumes that, you're going to be spending X amount of time or have X amount of expenses per level when we all know that's fucking not going to happen. So here's what happens. You build this loot curve, you build your loot table, you decide what you're going to give, how much you're going to give them per level or per whatever section of campaign you want to do. Then what you do is you keep this in your notebooks and you continuously reference it as you're running the campaign.
It won't help if you don't keep track.
Yeah, it won't help if you don't keep track. And if you get to 3rd level, maybe at the end of the session, you say, hey, guys, give me the total of your loot so far. Check it, make sure that they're, near where they're supposed to be at, right? If they're under, give them more next time. If they're over loot, find more things they have to spend their money on to advance the story. Mm-hmm. You can come up with situations to help them stay on this curve. And you can change the curve mid-campaign if you want.
Oh, absolutely.
This isn't a video game. You don't have to reprogram anything. Just go to your table and rewrite the table. You know?
It's your spreadsheet.
It's your spreadsheet. No one's gonna stop you.
What are the players gonna do? Whine?
I mean, yes, but I've changed the loot curve in your campaign like 6 times, so I'm trying to find numbers that I like, okay? It takes a while for me to find that thing. To find that place where I feel happy with the distribution and the expenses that I have going on and all that other stuff. It's a lot, because this is also like the basics, right? Mm-hmm. We have not touched up on how to build a loot curve when you're using random roll tables, which is something you can do, by the way. It just takes a whole lot more.
Ooh.
Right? And then, we had very simple expenses here, and then we're not accounting for if you want to do loot that's divided between in-game currency and items, especially items that you can't price. Like, if you have a gemstone that's worth 50 gold, well, then that's
basically just 50 gold.
It's just 50 gold, right? You just take
that's an easy one.
You take that out of the loot like no big deal. But if you have things like a 3rd level spell or something, or a custom-made potion, or...
The gentle tears of a mother for her child.
Yeah, that could be a magic item. When you have stuff like that, and especially in D&D with their huge range of prices they have for magic items, it can be really hard, but it's not impossible to still come up with a loot curve that accounts for that. You just kind of take this concept and you put it on steroids. This is just the underlying basics of it, where you're going to pick out how you want to section out your campaign. You're going to pick out how much money to give them per section. You'll do your best to estimate what their expenses are going to be per section, and then you do your subtraction on that. Then you go through and you price your items based on that chart that you get, right? Mm-hmm. And then you just kind of keep it with you for the rest of the campaign, and you use it as a guideline to make sure that you're staying on your own target. When you're GMing, you're just a person. There are things you can do to have the numbers support your story. And there are things you can do that can actually encourage the players to investigate other types of stories or investigate other avenues of obtaining what they want just by picking out some good numbers.
I'm also noticing that, like, the way you do this stuff, like, you were saying calculate expenses and stuff. You were doing, like, 10 expense out of 100 per level or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like, which leaves them 90% of it. This could also help you decide how much spare change you want them to have. Do you want them living on the edge, like, paycheck to paycheck? Maybe it's about, like, man, it's so tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be a real nitty-gritty campaign where,
Jimmy works a diner all day.
I was gonna say something like where you're in this, like, cyberpunk metropolis city and you're the bottom rung of the social ladder and you just gotta survive to the next day is your goal.
As John Bon Jovi would say, you gotta hold on to what you've got.
All right. I don't know. But
or do you want them to kind of feel like they're rolling in money a little bit? Do you want them to... Because some campaigns, you want the players want to feel a little bit like a little lean.
Or you can do a progress thing, where it's lean in the first few levels, but then as they level up, or as the story progresses, or as they beat more dungeons, again, whatever section system you want to use, they get more % of their profits. They get to start rolling in that dough when they didn't before. And how is that going to affect them mentally?
Right. Like, they get to have a little bit of a rags to riches thing. Or maybe it's like a really casual thing where they had riches the whole time. Right, or that. Or maybe they just get riches the whole time because this is a silly one and we're not worried too much about it.
Yeah, but so the numbers, now you might be stressing out, like, how do I know what loot to give them every level? So if you're working with specific campaigns like D&D and Pathfinder, that information is actually, well, should be in their Game Master's Guide or Dungeon Master's Guide or anything like that. But also, if you're running your own campaign for these systems, you can just, you make your own loot curve, and then you just reprice everything to fit your curve. Like,
you could decide that the health potion, instead of being, 50 gold or something in D&D, you're like, I've decided it's 5 gold.
It takes a little bit of extra time, but it's one of those things that once you've done it, you don't have to touch it ever again for the rest of your campaign. So that's the basics of loot curve. And we can do another one of these where we go a little bit more in depth, but I didn't want to overload you or our listeners with a ton of math. I really just wanted to go over the underlying concepts And these are concepts you can take into any campaign. It's not specific to anything. Yeah, next time we're going to keep going. We might answer some other questions from the community. Actually, I might go over how to find the average from a roll table, because then that average is how you'd build average.
Are averages different than adding things together and dividing it by the number of things you've added?
Well, when you're working with a table where you have a different % chance of rolling every result, it's a little bit different.
Okay, because I was going to be like, what?
It's not actually that complicated. It seems like it might be that complicated. It's not that, actually. You can set up a formula on Google Sheets to do it for
It just looks scary.
It just looks scary. So anyways, it's been real. Hopefully you learned something. Let us know what you think of this. And we'll see you next time, whenever that is. So make good choices, try not to die, and thanks for listening.
Bye!